Hello and welcome to our 16th podcast. I'm Linda, and here is Mike.
Hi, Linda. Welcome, everyone. In this podcast series, we are exploring social threefolding by reading and discussing the original 1919 basic book by Rudolf Steiner, The Core Points of the Social Question. Humanity is evolving toward an ever greater need for freedom, and so we need a new social paradigm called social threefolding to replace our existing hierarchical society. We are now reading chapter 2, which is about the principles and theory of social threefolding. So this chapter began with a comparison to the human physical organism. Our nerve sense system might be compared to the economic life, which is everything that has to do with the production, circulation, and consumption of goods. Our rhythmic circulatory system might be compared to the rights life, the life of politics, government, and law, which is everything to do with our purely human-to-human relations. And our metabolic limb system is comparable to the free cultural life, which is everything that has to do with individual abilities. Now, for historical reasons, within our current unified society, the economic life has come to be very dominant. The economic life is trapped between two boundaries: the natural foundation on one side and the rights life on the other. The natural foundation, the climate, whether tropical or temperate, the available resources and other natural amenities, is a given, and this shapes the economy in a profound way. The economy is also shaped by the talents and abilities of individuals, modified by education or life experience. Our economic life today is based on the division of labor, meaning we can collectively produce much more efficiently if we produce for others and let others produce for us. So through the economic life, through production, exchange, and consumption of goods, one person has certain relations with another. However, this kind of economic relation is something entirely different from the kind of relation that arises between people through the life of public law. In the economic life, one person serves the needs of another, and in so doing, other people serve our needs. However, in the rights life, human relations have to do with our mutual entitlements and obligations under the banner of equality. Laws apply, or at least ought to apply, to everyone equally. This equality principle is very different from the economic life, where the principle is that of serving the needs of others. Because the economic life and the rights life rest upon entirely different sets of principles, they must be made separate from one another. It's a mistake to try to combine everything together into a single large state structure, as social democracy does, because then the separate principles cannot realize themselves. The economic life will continually corrupt the rights life, and the rights life will continually thwart the economic life. So we must at least try to imagine how state and economy might become separate. We must consider how this is really the only way to resolve many of the current problems in our society today, problems that are often considered to be unsolvable. Now, last time we had briefly discussed how the 13th century Magna Carta, for instance, fell into relative obscurity for about 400 years, until it eventually became the basis for real institutional changes that brought about much healthier social forms today. In exactly the same way, social threefolding cannot afford to languish for centuries as a philosophical theory or a subjective wish. It requires real institutional changes in the immediate here and now. In a healthy social organism, the economy will be separate and independent of the political rights state. The economy will focus only on the efficient production and distribution of consumable goods, while the right state will focus only on fair human relations that satisfy our rights consciousness. State and economy will be functionally separate systems, just as nerves and circulation are separate systems in our physical body. So it follows that state and economy are to be qualitatively different. We must not simply imagine these to be two different parliaments or governments. The right state will be fundamentally democratic and have various legislative and executive organs. The economy will have its own institutions, consisting of economic associations and financial organizations based purely on what is needed for the economic life. State and economy will each have its own different leadership structures. The leadership of the right state will be chosen on a democratic basis, while the leadership of the economy will be based on expertise and experience. The leaders of each area will interact with each other as autonomous peers, much like leaders of sovereign countries do today. Each area will cultivate its own principles, and each will influence the other from the outside. So in this way, the economic life remains independent. It can move as needed between the physical limits set by the Nature Foundation on one side and the guardrail set by the rights life on the other. Unlike how things are today, the right state will not sit inside the vehicle with one hand on the steering wheel. However, at the same time, the right state will have a real power to enforce its guardrails without being subject to the corrupting forces of the economy. And so, economy will no longer be permitted to go beyond its proper limits and cause social harm, as it often does today. All right? That's a summary. Does that work for you, Linda?
That works very well. Yes.
Do you have any questions before we go on?
Nope.
Okay. So let's switch over to the screen share.
Mhm.
All right. So we had left off last time. We were on page 56, and we had read this very long paragraph within the social organism that has emerged. So it's quite a long paragraph and takes us to the beginning of page 57. And so I'll start by just recapping that paragraph. And there was a lot in it that we didn't quite finish last time. So I'd like to say a few words just to finish that up, or not just a few words. We'll see. So, um, all right. So what he's saying in this paragraph is that for historical reasons, the economic life includes more today than it ought to in a healthy social organism. A healthy economic life should only be about goods, about the movement of goods from beginning to end, from production to consumption, right? Today, however, labor and rights have become incorporated into the economic life in an unhealthy way. Today, we can exchange goods directly for labor, for instance, on a labor market. And thereby, human labor itself becomes a good. But labor is not a good, because labor cannot be detached from the human being and consumed like a good. So by treating labor as something we can buy and sell, we bind part of the human being to the economic process and make part of the human being a thing that we commoditize and dehumanize. And something similar happens with real estate when we imagine ourselves buying and selling real estate on a real estate market as if it were an economic good. In fact, real estate is something qualitatively different from a good. Real estate has to do with human-to-human relations, with entitlements and obligations, such as the exclusive right to use or the right to transfer. If, for instance, a landowner puts their tenants into a subordinate or dependent position, this is a human relation that is entirely different from the relation that exists when people produce and exchange goods for one another, where this same kind of dependency does not arise at all. Okay?
Mhm.
Remember this discussion last time?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Do you have anything you want to ask or talk about before I go on to say a few words?
Nope, nope. I'm curious to see how this, around the right to use and right to transfer in terms of the real estate. Um, how does that work? And, to understand it a little bit better.
Okay. So I'm going to start us off with some definitions because most of us are not experts in the real estate business, and even the word real estate, I'm not sure if people really quite understand the definition. So I'm going to just talk about a few things. First of all, the distinction between land and real estate. Land is a sort of subcomponent of real estate, okay? So land refers to the area, like the physical space that includes everything that is natural and unsevered. So the soil, as well as naturally occurring trees, rocks, plants, animals, and so on. All of this is considered land. And in German, Steiner uses the expression Grund und Boden. And so when he uses that specific expression, it's translated here as land. And this is different from real estate, okay? So real estate is a different word in German, Grundstück, or sometimes Immobilia, which means things that are immobile. And this refers to the land plus any artificial modifications. Okay. So, for example, if someone plants a hedge or digs a ditch or builds a road or a fence, these are modifications. And there are also any structures like a barn or a granary or a house. These are called fixtures. Okay. So the real estate is the land, which is the nature part, plus any modifications like ditches and roads, plus any fixtures like buildings and barns and such. Okay. So real estate is all of this. You could basically imagine it as having these two parts, the land component or the nature component, what is given by nature, and the infrastructure component, which is produced by human activity. And these two components must be looked at separately in Steiner's imagination. And then there's another definition, the real property. So when we say property, we don't actually mean real estate. We mean real estate plus all the associated legal rights and interests. So the right to use that's attached to the real estate, the right to transfer, different encumbrances, and so on. This is what is meant by property. Okay, does that help clarify all this?
Yep, definitely.
They're fine distinctions that, in ordinary life, we don't really make these distinctions, but for the purposes of this study, it's quite important to understand these differences.
Hmm.
Now, I'm going to add a few thoughts to this and then say that in this paragraph, so what Steiner says is technically correct, but it's necessary to go a little further to understand what he's saying. He's saying when he says a plot of land, he means real estate. Yeah. This plot of land is not a good that can be exchanged on economic markets. Okay. But in Steiner's understanding, the original land as such is equivalent to nature. So when the original land is worked upon, which means modified or improved by means of applied and organized labor, then it does become a good that enters the economic life, and it can be bought and sold just like any other good. So to be clear, if you acquire a piece of pristine nature, land, and then you work on this, let's say you drain if it's swampy or whatever, you drain it, you might clear the land of trees and stumps, you might break the soil so that it can be tilled, and then this now becomes an economic good because you are essentially taking nature and applying labor and organizing this labor it is no different than any other good. Like, let's say a potato, it's something of nature that you then apply labor, organize labor, and convert it into something you can sell at a market. So the
Mhm.
land worked upon by nature is a good, an economic good that you can buy and sell on a market. However, the moment that land becomes productive, okay, that it's now drained and tilled and ready to be seeded and then turned into a farm, okay, when this development work is finished, this land becomes no longer a good. And the societal rights relationship needs to change. Okay, so this is something he speaks about in the next chapter of this book. This is no longer a good, but it is now considered productive capital. It's a means of production. And this means of production needs to be owned through the rights life and managed through the independent and separate cultural life. So it needs to be removed entirely from the economic life once it becomes productive. And the same principle applies to all forms of capital, like machines or equipment or vehicles, factories, not just real estate. So we're going to go into all this much more deeply in chapter 3. More or less, the whole chapter is about this. But for now, we just need to take the immediate point that productive capital is not a good and does not belong to the economic life. So the
Mhm.
productive capital is regulated by rights, such as the right to use and the right to transfer and so on. The rights related to capital are different than rights associated with goods within the economic life. So real estate creates entirely different human-to-human relations than those relations created through the production, distribution, and consumption of goods. Is that clear as mud?
Clear as mud.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I mean, it's giving a little bit of, I mean, I'm really wanting to have obviously a better understanding of what does that mean and why did he come to that conclusion that it is sort of, there's such a stark difference between land that has been readied to land that can be used to produce. It's sort of making sense in that, okay, so he's saying that something, I guess, going on what we've said before, where the people should be sort of, with the association, should be looking at what are needed. Say, if that land was used to produce eggs, how many eggs are needed by the community? That then is that kind of sort of where we're going with that? Is that,
yeah,
or
so the economic associations have to do with the economic life. And
okay.
and so we have to make a distinction between the capital or the land or the real estate, which is a kind of means of production, and the production itself. So the means of production is the thing that makes the production happen. Like a chicken is a kind of means of production for eggs. Yeah.
Hmm.
And then the egg is the actual, well, okay, chicken might be a bad example because we consume chickens as well, but the chicken coop, let's say, chicken coop is a means of producing eggs insofar as it is a structure that allows protection of the chickens from predators and it allows us to be able to collect the eggs and so on. So this structure is a human-made building that we make that houses that allows the production to occur. So a chicken coop is a means of production,
Hmm.
but the eggs are the product.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So we consume the eggs, we don't consume the chicken coop.
Hmm.
Now, of course, the chicken coop depreciates over time, it wears out and needs maintenance and so on. But there's a distinction there between the chicken coop as a human-made structure that is built by humans and the land it sits on,
Hmm.
because the land it sits on is not constructed by humans. We just found it there. We didn't create it, it just was there, right?
Hmm.
And so it doesn't make sense in Steiner's mind that we should pay money for this land because nobody made it. It makes total sense that someone be reimbursed for creating a chicken coop because there was labor involved. This was a human construct.
Hmm.
So the economic relationship between people in terms of a chicken coop is entirely different than the soil it sits on.
Hmm. Definitely. Okay, so I'm getting that. All right. I'm curious.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think the plot will thicken as we go to the next paragraph because in the next paragraph he really talks a little bit about this relationship of labor, and the labor relationship is part of this
Hmm.
topic. Okay.
Okay.
So I suggest we go on and
Hmm.
read the next paragraph on page 57. It's a not a super long paragraph, but it's a fairly long paragraph,
Hmm.
and it'll also take some discussion to understand it.
Okay.
So I'll just introduce by saying what he will be talking about here is that there's a distinction between goods and rights, and this distinction must find expression in the institutions of the social organism. Now, it is entirely unproblematic when goods are exchanged for goods among producers and consumers within the economic life. The way the value of a good forms within the economic life is independent of the rights relations between people and groups of people. However, the moment goods are exchanged for rights, such as property rights, the rights relation itself is affected. The exchange of rights for goods is not what matters. Indeed, the exchange of rights for goods is a necessary, vital element in a modern social organism based on the division of labor. What matters is when, in the process of exchange, the right itself is falsely made into a good. This can happen when the right arises from within the economic life, instead of the right arising from within the rights life as such. So to prevent this, there must be a clear separation between the two areas. The economic life, on the one hand, must be limited to dealing with goods and goods alone, while the rights life, on the other hand, must regulate the rights of people involved in the economic production, exchange, and consumption of goods. For these rights are not essentially different from any other rights that have nothing to do with the economic exchange of goods. If at any time through an act or omission I help or harm my fellow human being within an economic context or within any other context of life at all, then this belongs to the rights life of entitlements and obligations. And so it's clear the rights life must regulate the rights of people in all cases, even when this involves the production, distribution, and consumption of goods. All right.
Hmm.
So let's read that, please.
Sure. Anyone who understands such a fact of life without bias will realize that it must find expression in the institutions of a healthy social organism. As long as goods are exchanged for goods in the economic life, the forming of the value of these goods remains independent of the rights relation between people and groups of people. As soon as goods are exchanged for rights, the rights relation itself is affected. It is not the exchange as such that matters. This is a necessary vital element of the current social organism based on the division of labor. Rather, what matters is how, through the exchange of the right with the good, the right itself is made into a good, if the right arises within the economic life. This is prevented only by institutions within the social organism that, on one hand, aim only to bring about the circulation of goods in the most expedient manner, and on the other, by institutions that regulate the rights pertaining to the exchange of goods among the producing, trading, and consuming persons. These rights are not essentially different from other rights that must exist in person to person relations that are completely independent of the exchange of goods. If I harm or help my fellow human being through the sale of a good, then this belongs to the same area of social life as a harm or help through an act or omission that is not directly expressed in an exchange of goods.
Okay, so I would say this is fairly difficult to grasp what he's saying at first.
Thank you for saying that. I was like, what? Okay, yes.
So yeah, I think what he's not saying is that it's impossible in a threefold society to exchange rights for goods. That is, to provide money, which represents a claim on future goods, as a form of compensation for gaining or losing a right. So he's not suggesting that real estate or real capital cannot be exchanged for money. He's merely clarifying that real estate or capital is fundamentally based on rights and is not a good, and that the acquisition of real estate falls under a different heading, that of compensation for gaining or losing a right, and not under the economic heading of buying or selling a good. So maybe I'll give you an example. Right?
Please, yes.
So let's say some person, let's call it person A, harms another person, person B, in some way. Let's say there was a car accident. And let's say that person A is found to be liable for the harm, such that person A is responsible to compensate person B. So this compensation might be done in several ways. And one way might be that person A pays a sum of money to cover B's costs related to the harm, like repair their car, whatever injuries, as is necessary to make person B whole again. So A transfers money to B, money that represents goods, yeah, to compensate for a rights relation, in this case, a harm, a liability. And so it's without any question that this is not a purchase. A is not purchasing rights from B, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
There's no exchange of rights for goods in any way similar to the economic exchange involved when a consumer pays a producer for a good. So, in other words, you can have a rights relation that involves a compensation through money, through goods, essentially. But that does not make it an economic relation.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's think of the opposite example, example two. Let's imagine we have a person C that
Mm-hmm.
provides some service or value to person D. And this time, person D is liable to compensate person C for this positive value that they provided. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, the money that passes from person D to person C does not represent an exchange of goods. It's a compensation as a matter of right for a service that C provided D. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So in this, just like in the previous example, D must compensate C in order to make C whole again.
Mm-hmm.
The money that represents goods is not necessarily an exchange for other goods. It's not a purchase relation. It's a compensation for the help that C provided. And this is exactly what happens when C provides labor to D.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if C does work for D and C provides some help or value add for D, then D has an obligation as a matter of right to compensate C for their contribution. So this is not an economic exchange of goods for labor. It's a compensation for what C achieved by performing labor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's perfectly fine if this compensation occurs using goods or money representing goods as a means of exchange, just as long as the right does not itself become a good. Yeah, they're not purchasing the labor. This
Mm-hmm.
right of compensation itself must not be bought and sold on a labor market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you with me?
Yes, yes, I am.
So
The examples really helped a lot.
he's speaking of the necessity of separating the economic life from the rights life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the rights is a certain kind of relation between people where there's certain entitlements and obligations by right. And then on the other side, there's an economic relation where I produce something for you and I can exchange, I can barter, what you produce with something I produce, or I can sell my products for money and then take the money and buy your products with that money.
Mm-hmm.
The money is just a means of exchange, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately we're trading goods for goods in the economic life.
Mm-hmm.
And these are two entirely separate things.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to keep in mind, are we talking about an economic exchange and an economic relation between people, or are we talking about a rights relation between people? And it corresponds to the separation of the rights life from the economic life, that these would be two entirely separate categories.
Mm-hmm.
And in our current society, they're all mushed together.
Right. I get these examples. I'm just curious. I'm lost. I haven't understood how it links to the real estate and the land distinctions.
Okay,
Oh,
that's exactly where I want to go next.
okay. All
So,
right.
so um, let's just say I want to say a few more words about labor first,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll talk about the real estate because this is exactly what I'm thinking about as well. So, the labor in a healthy society, the labor must never be considered part of the economic life at all. As we talked about at the end of chapter one, when labor is bought and sold on a labor market, like a good, like when the labor is bought and sold, we have a remnant of slavery. And we even sometimes call it wage slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So he's saying the compensation for labor must be entirely removed from the economic life and placed into the rights life in such a way that labor cannot be turned into a good in any way by the economic life. So, again, an example. Consider what happens when you buy vegetables from your local farmer at the farmer's market. Okay? You are paying for the vegetables. You're paying for the product of the farmer's labor, not for the labor itself, right? You're not purchasing the farmer's labor, but what the farmer receives, that is your money, is a form of compensation for their labor. Yeah? What they receive permits them to continue providing for themselves so they can produce more vegetables in the future. And this is a healthy relation between buyer and seller. Once the sale is finalized, once the goods are exchanged for money on an economic market, the relation between buyer and seller is complete, right? Everyone just walks away. But it's a very different thing when a farmer, let's say, hires a worker, like a farmhand, and pays them a wage. Okay? So when that happens, it would be an unhealthy relation if the employer were to buy the labor of the farmhand. So we shouldn't do this. So instead, we have to make the employer-employee relation similar to what happens at the farmer's market. Okay? The employer must purchase not the labor itself, but the goods or the achievements of the worker. And so the farmer doesn't buy the farmhand's labor, they buy what the farmhand's labor achieves. So let's say the farmer wants the farmhand to milk the cows. So the farmer would effectively pay for the milk that the worker obtains from the cows. That is for the product of the worker's labor, and not for the labor, not for the act of milking as such. So the relation between employer and employee is healthy only when the employer purchases the achievement of the employee in the same way as a consumer purchases a farmer's vegetables. And I'll refer the listeners to lecture 7 of the economics lectures about this, where he says this. Okay?
Mhm.
Are you with me?
I'm totally with you. Yes, I'm just really all ears.
So we have to distinguish between the product of labor, which is a separable good or achievement of the labor. This belongs to the economic life. This can be bought and sold, no problem. But the labor itself remains attached to the human being, and this must never be bought and sold. And this reduces the dependence of the worker, like the farmhand, on the employer, because their relation becomes one based purely on rights, on mutual obligations and entitlements, and not on the purchase of the worker's labor as if it were an economic good. And so labor and the achievements of labor must be kept strictly separate, corresponding to the separation of the rights life from the economic life in a threefold society. And this understanding is essential to Steiner's new labor framework, which we will look at more closely in the next chapter. Is that clear or
Yes,
confusing?
yes, it is. And I guess my question, and I imagine some people might be sort of thinking, I mean, okay, so we separate the achievement of labor, but oh, what difference does that make to, I mean, what are we actually doing here? Like, how does that change anything? I can see how saying, okay, I'm purchasing the achievement, the milk, and here is how much I'm paying for it, for the milk that you have been able to produce. But how does that, I mean, I, I know that there is something, but I'm just kind of curious, how does that change anything? Like if I'm just paying the same amount of money, is it a different, when you're talking about the relation, so it reduces the dependence of the, how does it reduce? I think that's the
Yeah,
fundamental question. How does it reduce the dependency of the worker on the employer?
right. Because it's an excellent question because it's really an attitudinal difference. I don't think the difference is going to be in terms of money or something that you're going to have more money or less money. It's more of how the human beings are in a relationship with one another. As the employer, do I own your time? Can I treat you in such a way that I say, I own your labor, I own your time, which is a kind of slavery concept? Or am I saying, look, I don't own you, I don't own you, I don't own your time. I'm just going to pay you to milk the cows.
Hmm.
It's 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 a more equal relation between people.
Hmm.
Just like when I'm at the market, I'm buying potatoes. I don't own the farmer. I don't. It's the same concept, and it should be the same concept with an employer and employee.
So it really sort of brings about in my system a level of respect.
Yeah,
That's what it boils down to for myself. Like, so if I require some kind of service from a person in order to get my goods out the door, I'm grateful that you can do this. Thank you. I need to produce 10 liters of milk today. Would you be able to do that? Yes. Great. Fantastic. Go ahead. And here's how much I'll pay you for that.
exactly.
So,
And so we also have to realize that Steiner's writing this in 1919.
Hmm.
And when we think about how labor relations are today, things have really changed a lot in the last 100 years. And what Steiner was arguing for at that time, I think not completely, but a lot of it has already come about because this is not how it was in his time. There wasn't a kind of peer-to-peer relation between employer and employee. You were really, as an employee, you were almost like a slave. And as you say, the respect, the dignity of the worker was just not there. But today we have, like, especially since the labor movements of the 1930s, internationally, we have labor laws, we have workers' rights, we have all kinds of things that are now in place that are along the lines of what Steiner is saying. I wouldn't say we have finished this task, that we haven't reached a full completion of what Steiner is indicating, but we have certainly come a long ways in the right direction,
Understood.
right?
Hmm.
And the same principle, though, actually also applies to real estate. So let's go into this a little bit. If you think of real estate or any form of productive capital, which could be equipment, vehicles, factories, machinery, when this productive capital is, say, transferred from one person to another, one one party loses the right to use it, and another party gains that right to use. And this right to use is valuable because it is a means of production allows you to produce something. As we were just saying, whoever has the use of the chicken coop is the one who can sell the eggs, right? So having the right to use the chicken coop is a valuable way to produce something, some good that you can sell on the economic market. Okay, so when you transfer let's say a chicken coop or any means of production, then the person gaining the right really needs to compensate the one losing the right to use. And when we talk about real estate ownership in general, it's the same process. We need to compensate, but that doesn't mean we're purchasing the chicken coop. Yeah, we're not buying it like it was a good. We're merely compensating for the right to use it. And when we use money or money representing a claim on goods to compensate, we're merely making that person whole as a rights issue. It is very, very different way of thinking than buying and selling real estate on a real estate market, as if it was a good.
Hmm.
Because then the real estate becomes an economic element, and it is not. Real estate is always a rights element. So the real estate transfers have to be handled as a matter of rights, and any payment or compensation must be done so that the real estate or the productive capital does not slip into the economic life and become a good. All right? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I understand what you're saying, and it doesn't make sense at the same time. I'm just open to deepening my understanding because I don't understand it at this moment in time. I understand he's trying to, here's what I think he's trying to do. And please correct me if I have any of this incorrectly. So he's trying to take away real estate from the economic world to somehow link it to, and it is linked in his system to the person to person rights. So the thing between two people. So, if I'm taking away your chicken coop, then you maybe you built it. I don't know. Maybe you were the first person to bring this chicken coop to life. and we're able to produce the chickens and the eggs and be able to take that product into the economic world and exchange it and all of that. But the purchase of the chicken coop itself is a kind of a transaction between two humans, and that relation then because it's the principle that the rights life is whatever is to do with the relations of the two people. Yes? Am I kind of sort of getting it, or I'm totally not getting it?
Yeah. So maybe it would help to take a step back and distinguish between what Steiner's proposing and what really is the fact of the matter.
Mhm,
So the fact of the matter is, um, and especially under common law, in common law jurisdictions like Canada, the US, UK, these kind of places, no one really owns land. No one owns it like you would own an egg. Like I have the right, when I buy an egg, I have the right to consume it. But the thing about real estate is you cannot really consume it. You you can't take it away and use it because underneath the land is just more land. You know what I mean?
mhm,
There's you can't destroy it in a way like you can with an egg.
mhm,
So the thing is, you in these common law jurisdictions, the crown or the state or whatever will only manage the right to use it. So when
mhm,
you sign a title to a deed to a real estate property, you are really just taking on the right to use, the right to transfer. You have an exclusive right to use, the right to enjoy, the right to, there's a whole series of rights that you get when you acquire real estate, but you don't buy it like a good. This is this is a real estate law. It's a
mhm.
legal transaction,
This is
very different.
current legal real estate law as it is right now in
This is
Canada and
how
UK.
this is how it is.
Hmm.
This is not Steiner. This is just law that goes back hundreds of years.
Hmm.
And but we imagine in our minds as if we're purchasing something like it was a good or even a speculative asset that we buy and we hold and then sell it at a higher price later and so on. But this isn't really what's happening. In reality, we're acquiring rights. We're compensating the previous person for handing over the rights. And then when we so-called sell real estate, we are receiving compensation for handing the rights on to the next person. Okay. So this is nothing to do with Steiner. This is just a fact of real estate law. Okay.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what he's saying is the way we treat real estate today, because our economic life and our rights life have merged, that's where we have the notion of a real estate market, as if it was a good that we're buying and selling like an egg. It is not. Okay. So first we have to mentally clarify the reality that we are compensating for rights when we acquire real estate. That's the reality.
Okay.
It's a very different human relation than buying an egg.
Hmm.
Because I have no, like I said, I go to the market, buy an egg, I walk away. I have nothing really to do with the farmer or producer of the egg after that.
Hmm.
It's a done deal. But with the real estate, it's an ongoing relation between myself and everyone else in society. Because if I have the right to use a certain piece of real estate, that means other people are excluded from that right to use.
Hmm.
So I can put up no trespassing signs or something if I wished. I could
Hmm.
stop people from using my land because I have a right to do this.
Hmm.
Okay. So the real estate is a rights relation. All right. So
Okay.
all he's saying is that we need to just be really clear about this, that we're not buying and selling a good when we're acquiring real estate. We're compensating for rights.
Okay.
And we
That's
have to
very.
make sure that the compensation doesn't become a good. It doesn't get dragged down into the world of economics.
Hmm. Okay.
And it's the same with labor. We have to make sure that labor doesn't get dragged down into the world of economics because labor is not a market. We're not buying and selling labor. We're merely purchasing what the achievement of that labor.
Mhm.
That certainly the achievement we can is an economic element that we can exchange for other economic elements, no problem. But the labor itself attaches to the human being, and it is a right, not a economic matter.
Mhm.
It's very important to distinguish.
Okay. Thank you for
Yeah,
clarifying. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's part of, yeah. We'll talk about this a lot more because this is an essential question to the question of ownership of property, let's say. Um, how the new ownership framework that he proposes is based on a distinction between the right to, say, transfer or the right to use. All these rights, what we call ownership of property, is really a bundle of rights. And these could be owned, these rights could be possessed by different parties. So one party could essentially have the right to transfer, and a completely different group could have the right to use. So for example, in our chicken coop example, you know, it would be a socialist idea to have the chicken coop owned and operated by some democratic group, like a cooperative or something. Then the owners and the managers, the users would be some kind of democratic process. And Steiner is against this. Then on the opposite side, we have capitalism, where the private individual owns and operates the chicken coop. And what's the criteria for that person? Well, they have enough money to buy it. They're the highest bidder on the market. They can purchase the chicken coop, and then just because of the fact that they have money, entitles them to do what they want with it. They could even not use it if they wished and let it just go into disrepair. And Steiner's picture of the ownership framework is a different one. It's a kind of middle path. Imagine that the chicken coop would be owned by some kind of community group, but managed by a specific competent individual. So not democratically. A competent person would be managing the chicken coop on behalf of the owner, which is society. And this manager would have the freedom to produce eggs and sell them on the market. But they could not do that in such a way that it would cause harm to the community, because the community would retain the right to transfer. And if a manager was causing harm to the community could transfer the chicken coop to a different manager who would be also competent, but not harming the community,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
it's not a private ownership concept, although the manager effectively is a private owner. It's not a communist or socialist ownership framework where there's a democratic management, because there's only one manager, let's say an individual. And it's kind of like what I was saying about the guardrails. The rights life could establish a guardrail around the management. And then within those guardrails, the manager is free to do as they wish.
Mhm. Mhm.
And this is a sort of first idea about the new ownership framework.
Mhm. Interesting. Very interesting. I can see people who are very capitalist minded going, no. But I mean, it's really interesting because what you're saying, I mean, I kind of had an inkling of an idea, but we kind of feel like when we purchase a home or whatever, that it's ours, that I can do anything I want with it. And like you said, whether I hold it to disrepair or actually do some beautiful work and it might go up in value or whatever in a person's hands. But in this system that your Steiner is sort of putting forward, it's like, okay, well, if the community, say, um, around us are seeing that the house, for instance, is going into disrepair, maybe there will be a curiosity as to what's happened with that person. Maybe there'll be a caring community. I'm imagining, I'm hoping. Maybe there might not be a caring community that might say, I don't like that person, I want them out. So we have the right to take them out. I think the capitalist person who's really sort of bent on ownership would say, no, I don't want other people to have rights over my, hard worked money that I've sort of, I think that I can hear the uh, sort of objections. I can also hear objections on the other side. It's like,
So I'm just going to pause there because you said a number of things that were just not quite true and
okay,
that are misleading. And
okay.
so you were speculating about something that we hadn't really discussed yet.
Hmm.
And I think you might have given the listener a wrong impression. This is
Hmm.
not the picture at all. So let's go back to what you were saying about how you currently you own your own home and you can do whatever you want. And this would also be true, I think, in a threefold organism, because the reason you think this is because you have the right to the equity. So when you uh, first acquire the property, you pay a certain amount of compensation, and then when you sell later or someone else acquires it from you, they will compensate you. So in between, if the value increases or decreases, that's your value increase or decrease, right? So in a way, you are completely responsible for your own house, and you can do anything you want to it because it's your money, as it were, right? So in our example of the chicken coop, one person might build the chicken coop or acquire it, and then they let it go into disrepair. So the amount of money that they pay to compensate the previous owner might be much more than what they get from the next person who buys this sort of there's holes in it or whatever and not in good shape. They will pay less. And that gap is a capital loss to the manager. So in the threefold society, it would be exactly the same, I imagine. The person would have the feeling I can do whatever I want because it's their risk, their equity, their gain or loss, their capital gain or loss. And I think that would be identical. I think you would feel the same pride of ownership, the same value of ownership as you do in private property. I don't think that would be any different. And the only thing that would really be different is that the choice of who is the owner is not based on who is the richest person, who can afford to buy it. It would be based on who is competent. So there would be some kind of vetting process, maybe a pool of people who are competent at running a chicken coop, because not everyone is. And so from this group, it would be decided somehow, and I'm not specifying how because it could be 1,000 different ways that you would decide this. I don't want to specify.
Hmm.
It depends on the whoever how some process is come up with that is deemed to be fair and a good process. But somehow a person is chosen to run the chicken coop because they are competent on behalf of society. They will produce the eggs that the consumers need. And if the person doesn't want to do that, well, then they won't be chosen. Someone else will be chosen. And so in that way, the rights will pass to a competent manager. Now, in the case of a private home, that's a totally different scenario. And again, I don't want to speculate about which one of the 1,000 ways you could do to choose who should live in what house. I'm not going to suggest any kind of socialist idea where there's a kind of democratic choice. I don't think that would be a very good idea. But there may be different ways of saying, well, this is a four-bedroom house and this is a family with children versus this is a two or one bedroom house and this is a single person or whatever. So there might be a way of matching somehow, I don't know how, that is not just whoever has the most money. Okay. So the picture is there would be some way of matching uh, competence or skills or needs with the use of things, which doesn't exist today. Today, it's just whoever has the most money can buy the bigger house.
Hmm.
And yeah, does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yep. Yep. Okay.
So it's easy to sort of let our minds wander into all kinds of crazy, nonsensical, possible. I don't think this is. I think we should try to stick with what is sensible and have the goodwill and the faith that there is a way to decide certain things that would work for people,
Mm-hmm.
not just sort of criticize and say, well, I can't think of a way, so there is no way. But I
Mm-hmm.
think we can put our heads together and come up with ways.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
But
Yep. It
but I
does.
really do think at the end of the day, once someone is using or has the exclusive right to use something, a chicken coop or a house, they will feel just like it was privately owned. It'll feel like it does today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, to a certain extent, we already, I mean, it, like you said, current law is you're purchasing the right to use and right to transfer. I think, okay.
But let's
So,
say, for example, you have a mortgage on your house.
mm-hmm.
You in a way, you're giving up the right to transfer because the bank will hold that right to transfer. You cannot sell it without permission from the bank. So when you pay off your mortgage, then you receive the full title, and then you also receive the right to transfer. So this happens quite a bit already, that there's a distinction. The ones who have the right to use are not the same people as the people who have the right to transfer. This already exists. And
Mm-hmm.
and he's just specifying that what should this right to transfer be based on? Who should it be transferred to? Is it a good that anyone can just walk up and buy because they can outbid the others? Is that the
Mm-hmm.
reason that they have this house? Maybe. Or there might be other ways to decide this that are a little more equitable because the rights is the world of human to human relations. And how we decide these rights is a human to human issue, not an economic one. All right, does that make sense?
Okay. Yep. I mean, thank you for sort of explaining that. And, I have a sense, a little bit of a sense of kind of a little bit of skepticism and a little bit of curiosity. And sort of, I'm open to understanding on a deeper level without sort of dismissing it as, oh, this is just another form of communism or another form of socialist democratic sort of, or it's another, whatever it is. This is really different up to now in the way that it is really the human is at the center
Yeah.
of and the human well-being and is at the center of this. So that I'm sensing. I'm curious to see how this unfolds, and you know, you do a good job of explaining these complicated, what is complicated, Mike. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate your skepticism. I'm also a very skeptical person. Um, I will just say to our listeners, this is not a socialist concept. I would describe it as the next evolution of private ownership, a healthier form of private ownership than we currently have. We're not here to abolish private ownership. We're here to make private ownership more healthy.
Mm.
Because right now
Thank
it's
you.
not entirely healthy.
Mhm.
Okay,
Okay.
so I think
Thank you, Mark.
That's it for today's podcast. I guess we'll see you next time.
Sounds good, Mike. Thank you. Take care. See you next time.
Okay, bye now. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit like and subscribe.